Hello and welcome to this Conversations on Grung episode. We are going to discuss a draft law that would force businesses to install security cameras on and around their premises and connect their feeds to the government's surveillance network. So we have with us Arthur Babian and Ruben Muradian, who are cybersecurity experts in Armenia. Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to the show.
Ողջույն Arthur, ողջույն Ruben.
It is nice to be here.
Hello, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Yes, it's always great to talk tech on this show. So, last month, a very onerous draft bill on surveillance was proposed by Pashinyan's government, which flew under most radars, except a few in the business of security, privacy, and civil rights protections. Essentially, this draft law would require all but the smallest businesses to install high-res cameras to watch over and around their premises, the entrance to their businesses, and what's more, to continuously share the video and audio streams with the government. Pretty much all businesses that occupy over 50 square meters of space would be affected. Arthur, can you give an overview of this draft law for our listeners?
So very quickly, this is a draft law at this point. It's not a law yet, and we are really hopeful that it won't pass the parliament in its current shape because it is pretty disastrous. For context, it is going to create total surveillance system because from what I understand, the government wants already at this point has ability to go to reach out to any business and ask for video feeds. Many businesses right now have cameras installed, etc. So the whole point that the law says it's trying to solve to enhance the security of citizens, I think there is a lie in this premise because they have this ability right now. The whole point of connecting it all and giving it a 24/7 feed is that the government wants to be able to track anybody across the country. Because when you look at what it's trying to cover, it's pretty much going to cover every business, large government, companies, huge places, as well as anything that's small. So if you have these 24/7 live feeds, and if you have ability to also employ some AI technologies, which are currently available, and we can maybe talk a little more about what we already know about the use of AI in Armenia. This means that the government will have no problems tracking multiple people across the country. And what issue is this going to solve? This is going to create a situation when people are scared, when people who are really going to do protests, come out and speak about issues that are concerning to them, those are the people who will be tracked. Because, for example, if it's a criminal has a different set of approaches. They don't need to be visible. They don't need to go out in the squares and protest and go there to their houses and back. A criminal will cover their space anyway. Like this will happen anyways. The government, whatever they have tools for criminals, it's already there. Armenia is pretty much videographed all over. Like you cannot pass any street in Yerevan without being in multiple video feeds. There is currently also a case about public transportation in Armenia because there are cameras in the public transportation. And I think that this is almost illegal. There is actually some case. I know that Committee to Protect Personal Data has complained about this. The government, the Yerevan municipality is doing some protest about this, and probably they will get away with that. But this is what worries me. Like the real honest citizens will suffer, whereas the government, the police will not have anything to gain. Mm-hmm. Also, this will create a tax burden for businesses because a business can have a camera, but not stream it 24/7. For example, as a head of an organization myself, I've installed cameras and I don't have the storage capacity. I don't have a DVR recorder. All I do is I have some recognition, motion detections. And when there is a motion, I will record it. And this will not create this huge load on my network because I have several cameras.
Arthur, that was going to be my next question. Who is going to pay for all of this technology, installation, maintenance, and also let's not forget day-to-day administration, because I'm sure that there will be times when the camera is off and the police will come and say, make sure that the camera is on, turn it on, and so forth. It seems like you're businesses would be forced to accept a significant burden, but not just financially, but also administratively.
Exactly. And this is not something that my business, for example, or a business of somebody who cooks, or there's a hairdresser or something. This person doesn't need this for their own business purposes, because for their business purposes, they don't need 24/7 streaming. They can just install a motion detection, turn it off during the daytime and only turn it on when it's evening. It will not force them to have a broadband connection. It will not make them like connected to a system. And make no mistake, this means that if you connect a camera 24/7 to your internal network, there's going to be problems, and you're going to give the police access to that, which means you have to also purchase another router, create subsets into your office in order to separate access for the police to your network. And all of this does not make any business sense. So essentially, the government is adding another tax to businesses, another tax to public organizations, and forcing them to make all these extra expenses for something they don't actually need. And also, the government doesn't actually need that for the reasons they have declared. They are not going to solve the issue of reducing crime. Everybody knows that there's huge amount of cameras. They're videographed all the time. Like the cameras I mentioned, every day somebody from the building will come and say, somebody scratched my car. Can you please give us some access? So people see that there are cameras. People are aware of that. I have no idea. Actually, I have a very good idea what this law is actually solving, and it's not solving crime.
Look, the first thing is that it is being told really often, but no action is being implemented. There is no civil control over police actions. I mean, there's nobody, there's no state institution or civil institution that controls the actions of police. Perhaps it could be a human rights defender, but to be honest, the current human rights defender does anything but not protecting rights. And first of all, we have to understand who will control the police in those actions. The next thing is that currently police has no capacity to collect and record this data on its storage. So the recording of that amount of data will create a need of really big storage capacity at our police. And they have no that storage capacity currently. So most probably the first implementation of this law and the first steps for this law will be the ability to access the cameras without getting in touch with the camera owners. I mean, police will have database of access credentials to those cameras and will access those camera recordings or camera footage at the time they need it, without making the camera owner knowledgeable about this access.
So, Ruben, there will not be a process for subpoenaing the data. So, for example, you would not go to a business and say, we are in need of this data provided to us.
I mean, forget the subpoena. What if just a notification? Hey, we accessed your data on this and this
Exactly. That's my point. So when we are talking this, it means that at some point, police will be going through the cameras and get the recordings, having that access by their own without even informing the camera owner that his data was accessed. So the first part of this stuff will be that, because right now they have no capacity to record all the stuff. But I want to bring to your attention a really interesting scandal that have started in the late 2018. There was a scandal regarding Huawei and the project of Smart City that have started in the late 2018 and continued until the mid-2019. And at that time, there was a project proposed by Huawei to implement the centralized video recording of all cameras in Yerevan in order to create smart city functions like traffic jams, control over traffic jams, control over public transportation frequencies, and so on. So Huawei have proposed to implement that stuff free of charge and will charge municipality only for the operational costs of this data. Arthur, you have to remember that stuff.
Oh, actually, I do. And this is what I meant when I was saying there are some interesting AI related issues that we should talk later on. This is something that the government has announced several times that they are already using some AI, some machine learning to control the traffic, etc. And in the justification of this law, one of the provisions that they said is this will allow the police to regulate traffic more effectively, which is
efficiently.
more efficient, which is a blatant lie because actually the traffic on the roads is done by the parking city service cameras, which are already under total government control. So they don't really need this law for that. So what bothers me is the justifications, because a law should have certain logic. Like you have to only process enough personal data to reach your aims. And if you are doing more than that's definitely illegal, and that goes counter to the letter of law. Also, another thing about Huawei, actually, this is an older story because I had looked about this and our team has talked about it. This has happened even before 2017. The Yerevan municipality has been talking about Huawei. They have been doing this Huawei-related technology. There was also something during COVID when the Armenian government was trying to install some China, Singapore-style surveillance system for tracking citizens. So we are seeing that since 2017, since 2018, Armenian governments, actually different governments, have continually been pushing on this path of doing more surveillance, tracking citizens. And this current government is actually one of the worst offenders, which is very ironic because they came to power saying all sorts of slogans about more democracy, more freedom of speech, and respecting human rights. But we are seeing that they're becoming even worse violators of those same rights than the previous governments, which they were accusing of doing literally the same thing.
There's a special note that I would like to bring to your attention that during COVID, Armenian government was trying to install a malware on phones of our citizens. So Deputy Minister of High Technology was telling how to sideload an Android APK file into a phone that was not published on Google Play. And that application was infamous Iranian stuff that was under the idea of contact tracking for COVID infections, was collecting surveillance data from phones. But additionally, I would like to mention another thing, that this law totally contradicts, is in conflict with a law on personal data. And one of the issues with this is that a person's location is a part of his personal data. So this personal data will be collected and it is possible to analyze it automatically. So at least the law on protection of personal data shall be or amended, or this law will be in conflict with, that surveillance law will be in conflict with law on personal data. So there are a lot of questions to be answered, but unfortunately only Artur from civil society and no one else is asking those questions, and no one is voicing those questions. Even the opposition is not voicing those questions.
One thing I wanted to actually say, to dwell into areas which we are actually more specialized in, because I'm sure that this government, when they want to find some legal justification, they will find it, even though I agree with Ruben that this, whatever is doing, is in stark contradiction with Armenia's constitution and with the law on personal data protection. But from our perspective, from the perspective of digital security, here are the two main problems I see. The government is going to force tens of thousands of businesses to install cameras, to install network equipment, to connect it into a one huge, gigantic network, which will be like very akin to putting all your eggs in one basket, which means that it's going to be the ultimate prize. Everybody will want to break into this. And how is all this networking going to be organized? It will most likely be through internet, or the government will have to build some sort of an alternative network, which they have not mandated in this law, and which would become another tax on telecom providers if that's how it is implemented. Right. So at this point, we want to criticize that, because This will be the price literally. And Armenia does not produce its own networking equipment. Armenia does not produce its own cameras. We have no control over the supply chains. We're too small as a country to go to China and say, like, we are going to look at your factory, whatever you're putting there. So this will create a very diverse network, which will be impossible to protect in many ways. We have also seen that this government has already in the past shown that it is unable to protect its infrastructure, REC cameras, because I've publicized actually screenshots from Azerbaijani hackers who had broken into parking city service cameras, hundreds of cameras in Yerevan. They put out the access onto the internet. Anybody was able to go and look at the cameras in Yerevan. And they had also publicized lots of screenshots of what's happening in Yerevan. So this government, these authorities who were unable to protect this in the past, now are also making a huge, much larger network with a bigger price, with much more diverse cameras, because if it's the government buying the parking city service, for example, networks, at least there's some guarantee that there is some sort of requirements. But if it's a business, like, what's the requirements? How are they going to secure this network? So I would like to invite our friends here to comment on the security or the vision that I have highlighted here.
You are listening to the Grung podcast. Hovik, let's take a break and remind people that we will love to receive their support for our efforts. Today, we're covering an issue of fundamental concern to any citizen in a modern society: cybersecurity, privacy, and the threat of pervasive and uncontrollable surveillance. We raise these issues to make you aware of the path that Armenia is embarking on, and because we believe that an informed person can also become a more active and involved citizen of the world.
Folks, I hope you appreciate the lengths that we go to get you this content. Sometimes I feel, and I'm sure I'm echoing Osped as well, that we're screaming into the wilderness, and we don't mind a few other voices joining us to listen, or at least, ears joining us to listen to our screams. But we truly do strive to bring you independent content, bring you content that should be on the top of the entire public's attention, but is not. And today's topic is, for me and for Osped, at its core, is one of the most essential topics that should be in public discussion, but isn't. So if you agree with us, if you want to support this type of content, please support us. It means a lot morally, and it would mean that we're doing a good job. Podcasts.grung.org/donate.
Our topic today with Arthur and Ruben is not just about cybersecurity. It's also about government policy, responsibility, accountability, and all that is lacking for good government that is respectful towards its citizens and their rights.
Well, the issues we're talking, Osped, are at the core of human rights. Human rights is no longer just the right to have food and water, electricity, electricity. Privacy, the right to privacy, the right to security, the right to not be surveilled constantly is also an ingrained privacy law, especially within the Western system of values, which I think that in many cases we all share.
We will continue to cover these fundamental rights over the coming weeks and months. So if you appreciate candid discussions such as these, please visit podcasts.grung.org/donate and become a sustaining member by supporting us with a monthly contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now back again to our conversation on Grung with Arthur Babian and Ruben Muradian.
I just want to ask one question and let this continue, because Arthur, you said something very interesting, which is that we should focus on the security aspects. For our listeners, I think it's important to understand that there's in between all these discussions, there's this minor nuance of whether is this a security versus a privacy issue. Privacy issues focus on individual rights to control their personal information, to understand how states are able to use that information, and also retention of that information. And there is even Armenia. I have to politicize a little bit, because there was a recent poll in Armenia that said more than 50% of people want to join the EU. Well, one of the core EU rights is the right to forget. So if someone wants to be forgotten, there isn't even a right about that. So I think it's important to focus on privacy specifically, because I don't understand why there should be this, it should be ignored. But yes, let's talk about why the separate security component of this, and we have a separate section on this we can go into. But also, Arthur, it's very interesting that you're saying that we should focus on the security specifically,
The reason I'm saying is because I know that the government has put a pretty good justification in the law. The Armenian privacy law, I don't want us to do something and then they would accuse us in disseminating fake information, and that devaluates the whole points that we're making, because the government already has provisions where they would, for example, like they've publicized personal data in elections AM, and I think that is pretty big violation of constitution and security, but they have a justification in the very privacy law we're mentioning, because it says the government can use degrade privacy rights when it's an issue of security. And that's why I want to beat them in at their own coin and in security itself, telling that this is not increasing security in any ways. On the contrary, that's the thing. I don't want us to suddenly like say something we don't know enough about, and then like somebody comes and says, you guys don't know shit you're talking about.
I would like to say that telecoms will be happy with this law, because actually all the entities that will be forced to provide access to the cameras will be using more bandwidth and actually will be forced to have better contracts with telecoms. So when it comes to telecom operators, I'm pretty sure that telecom operators will be totally happy with this law.
But aren't telecom operators also individual citizens? And don't they walk in front of stores and maybe are afraid that one day that information will be used against them?
Have you ever heard, Hovik, any complaint from telecom operator about breaking into the privacy of their customers?
Well, I know a few of them that recently cooperated with the Armenian government but are not in the country anymore. So that's what I know about so far.
As far as I know, their concerns are only about cost and not about the privacy of citizens.
Exactly, Aspect. Exactly, you're totally right. They will be happy to sell more because of the requirements of this new law. So, and coming back to the security and coming back to the point that Arthur have risen, look, I have to agree with Arthur that we are creating a single point of trusted information. And just imagine what will happen if that database of accesses to cameras will be leaked, or will be hacked into, or will be publicized. Please remember, that's the point that I'm always make. Arthur, you have got information about the hack into city parking city service infrastructure just because Azeris have published it. And you still don't know what they have not published.
Exactly.
And my understanding is that there's a big lack of an approach that is legally written, for example, in the United States, and it is mandatory disclosure. Armenian government is very tolerable to hiding the unpleasant stuff under the carpet. And they are opposing the mandatory disclosure, an issue that I am raising every time I see a government official. They are saying, okay, how can we publish the stuff that we were hacked into? And I say, guys, it is the only way to keep citizens knowledgeable about the data they have leaked. Their data that have leaked, and they have to change this data, or perhaps government shall issue new passports if those passports have been leaked, or something like this. And we have to understand that until there's no civil control over police and over special services, we cannot be sure that these facilities will not be misused. So the main idea is that even if the government is trying to build this infrastructure, there shall be mandatory public control over this stuff. And while this stuff is not publicly controlled, it is breaking the core idea of checks and balances. But again, no one cares.
What is the current status of this proposed law? When do you anticipate that it will be brought into the parliament for voting? Does this law need to go through, vetting and review by EU agencies? For instance, we know that constitutional laws normally get reviewed by the Venice Commission. Is there a similar process for this law, especially since there seems to be a lot of privacy concerns, maybe at least among a few crazy people like us? And yeah, I have many more questions, but just those two in terms of the procedural aspects of this. When can we expect this issue to heat up and be on the agenda of the public mind?
So procedurally, this law was brought to Parliament last month. It passed the first reading, which means that it will need to pass another reading, or it could even go into some editing, re-editing, and pass into third reading, and then it would have to go to the president for signing, which is a mere formality in Armenian situation now, if government really wants to. It's not a constitutional law. It's an amendment to the law about the police. So it does not need, and the government will definitely avoid sending it to any expert opinion if they can. So there is no mandatory, approval or something like that. They can pass it. The government has closed the summer session. It even had an extraordinary sitting, but this law didn't go there. So if they're very, very in a rush, they could do another one, but it's very highly unlikely. So I guess this law will go into the parliament in September and pass in the second reading. If we don't mobilize some sort of support, if citizens do not protest, if businesses don't say, like, don't put on this new tax on us for no reason. Other than that, I expect it will pass in September, and then the only thing we could do is challenge it in court. Businesses could say that we're not going to do these costs. It's not useful for our business purposes, or privacy rights advocates. My team, for example, would definitely go to court and say, like, we protest this and we think this contradicts constitution, etc. And then that could be dragged for months, but the law would in fact be in effect, and the government would start forcing people to do this. I even know that there are some government connected maybe or some businesses who are already coming and offering discounted options for selling cameras to businesses, etc. So it seems like where there's demand, there will be supply situation is working, and some suppliers of cameras and telecoms, etc., are going to be pretty happy to sell all this extra load of cameras. Many businesses who already have some sort of cameras would have to incur extra costs because their cameras do not follow the requirements that are there, because this law also mandates specific requirements for the cameras. It has to be to be able to have night vision up to 30 meters. It has to be, HD quality video, etc. So if you have a smaller or older model or something that's not connected, it's just a DVR recorded into your office, then you're going to have to do some sort of ability to put some extra DVR network equipment, etc., to be able to.
Arthur, do you get the impression that they want to run facial recognition on the data?
There is no other justification for this law, because to have this amount of video streaming into the government, the only reason I can think of is this, because they will have some facial recognition, hash it. Ruben mentioned that the government does not have so much storage data, but if they have storage AI connected to the whole system, they don't need to spend like two, three people, like an analyst, an officer, etc., following every person, but rather to give task to AI to look at the face across many different cameras and just to highlight the important stuff, who this person met, what transportation he went into. So that would become a very easy tracking system.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your organization and also the community of coalitions that are going to work against this proposed law? Let me also mention here that the Justice Ministry's own data protection agency raised red flags about this. And despite this, the Defense, Interior, and Justice Ministries have signed on board with this draft law. So even inside the government, there are proponents and opponents, but it doesn't seem like some communities are being heard properly.
So my organization is actually a media organization called Media Diversity Institute, which has launched a threat lab because we felt that if we want to work with media and protect the media, we have to have some sort of enhanced cyber capacity. And sometimes Ruben Muradian, present here, will kindly help us pro bono. Sometimes there are some other technical specialists who don't really want to publicize this fact, will work with us. We also have our crew, and we also have in our team a lawyer who works with us on these type of issues. We monitor the laws, and whenever these are laws related to cybersecurity, personal data, anonymity, we will try to jump in. Sadly, our resources pretty limited. We will work against this law as much as we can, for sure. And we will also try to get some support from businesses, from cybersecurity specialists, from other human rights organizations, because from the perspective of media, human rights, this law is going to be very problematic. Because if you are, for example, an organization which provides support to women who are, I don't know, facing family violence, this organization will be mandated to put cameras across and provide 24/7 streaming. And some angry husband can definitely find a friend in police and find out whether his wife went into this place. And this becomes a pretty big violation for human rights ability to find shelter. This will also create huge problems for journalists, because if a journalist wants to anonymity meet a friend or a source and try to figure out something, and the rights to protect your source is actually enshrined in the Armenian law for media, these journalists will have definitely big problem, because there are limited numbers of journalists. There's like, say, 100, 150 of them. And if you put some AI and face recognition, you can track all the journalists or all the journalists who are likely to do some sort of an investigation and see who these people are meeting, where they're going, etc. And very easily find out who they talk to. And this will create a situation when sources will not want to talk to journalists because there's surveillance all around.
So, Arthur, who is driving this bill? I mean, did the government wake up one morning and decide we need this giant surveillance system, or are they being driven, do you think, externally? Or who's driving?
I don't think. Look, we spoke about Huawei, which is a Chinese corporation which is interested in putting some solutions. But I don't think this is anybody externally driving this. This is more like Armenian government's newfound, like this thing that they have to make this into a police state. I don't have figures to talk about this because this is not really my area, but I know that the number of police officers has increased significantly. The government has changed a lot of changes, has done a lot of changes to the police force. They have recently also turned it into a ministry. They're investing heavily into police, etc. And then when there are some protests, etc., police are being very protective of this government. They're not protecting citizens, which is their obligation. They're protecting this government, which is a very different thing. And it seems like, and this is a law that the police is advocating, and I think this law demonstrates the insecurities that this government has when it's seeing more and more protests. It wants to be able to protect its interests. It wants to be able to track its critics. It wants to be able to track the journalists who are likely to expose their issues within this government. And this is what really worries me, because, as again, I don't think that this law is solving the issues that they have put in the justification. This law is not solving the issue of tracking criminals. This law, because the government already has this ability, they can reach out to any business and tell them, like, to force them to even with subpoena, etc., to provide the feeds or video if there was a crime.
Fighting drug trafficking was one of the reasons that they mentioned.
The way it works with crime is you have the presumption of innocence. So you don't need to follow everybody, because if there's a crime, then you do the process, you do the subpoena, you get the footage, and then you investigate it. But this law is a preventive thing, like it's 24/7. So in case something happens, so you violate 3 million rights in case there is one person who is violating something. And this is completely disproportionate to the rule of law, to the understanding of security, constitution, to the law of personal data, and to many, many other issues that I'm highlighting here.
Ruben, I want to ask you a question. Arthur previously just mentioned that Armenia, is seeking to become a surveillance state. I think that you have done a lot of work on attacks using Pegasus and Predator on journalists and on media and even on politicians. Can you tell us if you agree with him? And also, can you tell us, we briefly touched upon the security incidents during the war, like the ones that the Azerbaijani government publicized that our government is hiding. Can you tell us if you feel that this government is in any way capable of securing this data that it wants to control? It's astounding to me because these same people who visit these coffee shops, these storefronts, are going to be the wives and the children of these police officials, right? So don't they have any notion of personal security and privacy when they're dealing with these things?
Look, first of all, I totally agree with Arthur's statement that we are moving to the classical police state that was described a lot in literature. And right now, the government is touching the water, trying to understand how much disagreement they will get during this proposal. Most probably, the disagreement will be not that big, and they will push this into legislation really easily. But if we would look deeper into this situation, we will see that there are a few draft laws that are being held in the parliament. The first draft law that is periodically reviving is the law of blocking access to the casinos that are not following Armenian laws. It is the first thing, and the stuff behind this is that government is trying to implement the content filtering facilities on the operator level to filter the internet. Perhaps you don't know that story, that infamous Roskomnadzor, a Russian entity that is blocking access to various websites, was created to fight child pornography. I mean, the main reason was to fight child pornography. And
Yeah,
then,
the road to hell is paved in
Exactly.
well-intentions,
Exactly, and then it developed, starting from 2012, it has developed into a massive content filtering system that currently blocks nearly 10% of the internet. So when we are talking about stuff like this, I've mentioned the gambling law. Another law is regarding regulation of cryptocurrencies, and again, draft law of this is being developed. And regulation of cryptocurrencies expected to ban all the crypto exchanges that are not obeying Armenian laws, meaning that only one crypto exchange currently will be open to customers.
managed by the central bank.
Not managed by the central bank, but licensed by the central bank.
Okay.
Then we have this law on cyber surveillance, this law on video surveillance that will allow government to track people movements. No one knows how deep and how far they will go in implementing that surveillance, various surveillance types over citizens. And the main issue that I do see here is that our civil society, with few minor exceptions, is silent on this. I mean, it is a total silence. Arthur is one of the courageous people who is voicing this stuff, but
Well, since Arthur is here, he is our resident civil society representative. What can you say against that accusation, Arthur? Why is the Armenian civil society so blindly silent and allowing this government to do all these indiscretions against its citizens?
Firstly, I wouldn't agree that the civil society is that silent. Actually, we are seeing more and more criticism against these type of issues. The problem with this specific law is many of the civil society people are not technically prepared
Savvy.
enough to understand, tech savvy enough to understand this. So they need to be explained this. And one of the reasons I'm talking about these issues and I'm reaching out to the government is this law literally dropped there. I didn't go into any public discussion. Nobody really had from the civil society chance to learn it. We learned about it one day, next day it passed the first reading, and it's now only that we are talking to the civil society to unite against this.
Without any disrespect, and I truly do respect you personally, my impression about a lot of the Armenian civil society is they're agenda driven, they are funding driven, and as long as there is no funding for them to care about this particular problem, they will not do it. I can name names, but I won't. But do you see that as a problem? Do you see that why should you, with and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, like a small organization, one or two people, be the spear carrier for this when there are organizations that get millions of dollars every year to safeguard citizens' rights? So isn't Ruben's criticism a little bit correct in this regard?
The problem is, what do we understand under civil society? Civil society is pretty wide. TV companies, TV channels, media are all civil society. I don't see even the most opposition media paying enough interest to this topic.
Yes.
Why? Because they don't understand it. Like, who is stopping them from talking about this law? Who is stopping
But the
them?
opposition is not getting millions of dollars of funding to care about this human rights.
Some of the opposition media are getting millions of dollars, believe me. Again, there are organizations who are able technically to understand, comprehend this, and raise the issue. Sadly, in Armenia, it's only our organization, a couple of others who are, for example, there is a large civil society organization called Union of IT Technology Enterprises. There's another one which is for cable producers. These are the technological, or there is, for example, Montashian's Business Enterprise. This is a huge technologically tech-savvy organization. These organizations are not saying anything, even though it directly hits their interests.
I think we need to have a separate podcast about this, because I have a lot to say about these organizations that, at least on paper, seem to be independent. But I would argue that many of the organizations that you mentioned also have dependencies on the government, and dependencies on the banking system, dependencies on the telecom system, where many of those people have individual, connections to these organizations. So let's have that for a separate podcast. But
definitely, but I want to make sure that we understand what civil society is, because there's, for example, a couple of civil society organizations which are getting a grant type of funding, but there are many other types of civil society, and none of them seems to care. So if you would blame some organizations that they receive donor funding and they don't care, which I don't know, I need to talk to them about this. Then what are the others who have different sources of funding? Why are they not talking about this?
Well, for all its fairness, the first time I heard about this issue was on opposition media, but I will not be the defender of the opposition. I think that in general, the opposition as well is not doing a good enough job of spreading this message.
So, Ruben, I think it was you who mentioned that the government really doesn't have the technology infrastructure to really do a secure job of such a centralized monster that we've been talking about. Interestingly, just during her visit to Armenia this past week, Samantha Power, director of USAID, announced a US-funded deal for the Armenian government to use Amazon Web Services, AWS, as part of its so-called digital transformation efforts. Exactly. The announcement sounded almost like a press release, and let me tell you, the United States doesn't like to give any kind of money that doesn't benefit it directly. Do we know any details about how the Armenian government is planning to use AWS with this money?
And also, what sent chills down my spine was in that same announcement that sounded like a press release by a cloud provider. It said that this system can withstand cyber attacks and can withstand privacy attacks, and it will safeguard security and privacy. So just there, I think it is implying that there is privacy-sensitive information that is in the agenda for this deal that's going to happen. So is there any more details on how this is going to be used?
Look, it is really a great question. In the end of 2022, when the Amazon Web Services and Armenian government have signed a memorandum of understanding, there was a heated debate in the comments of Arthur's status on Facebook. Arthur, you have to remember it. The most interesting part is that memorandum was not published. I mean, there was mentions about that memorandum in media, but the text of this memorandum was not published. There are rumors that Armenian government is trying to implement cloud-first approach to the government systems. But these rumors are being, currently nearly 90% of questions that are being raised on government sessions that are taking place every Thursday are secret, are not reported. So government publishes only 10-15% of the questions that they're discussing on their on that chair on Thursdays. So I have information that some of this cloud-first approach was discussed and most probably accepted. At some point we will see it as a government decree that government will promote cloud-first approach for its informational systems. And this funding and this, let's call it press release done by USAID and Samantha Powers comes to prove that approach. Because right now it's like a hook to a fish, that fish is being fed with the worm on that hook, and that 5 millions, to be honest, it is not that much. And both of us do work with cloud services. 5 millions for cloud services in terms of storage capacity is nothing. It can be eaten like in 1 year. For storage of amounts of data like video surveillance and analysis of that kind of data massives through the cloud. So I'm really afraid that we are breaking the approach that is called CIA G8 in cybersecurity. It has no connection with CIA like Central Intelligence Agency, but it's an abbreviation for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So when it comes to the last word of this abbreviation, availability, it means that if we will be storing government data on cloud services, at some point this data may become unavailable. Proven by Russia in 2022, then when suddenly all the cloud services have stopped serving Russian customers because of political consequences.
Yeah, I mean, another term for this is data sovereignty, and
exactly,
we know
data
that
nativity.
and we know that many countries around the world have laws against this. So, like, if you're processing data on EU citizens, then you're supposed to store it on EU servers, and Amazon has specific data centers in the EU regions that it advertises
Exactly.
and that it promises to its customers that it will never ship the data off of those servers. Same with US, same with Asia Pacific, and so forth. Now, we know that Armenia is so small that Amazon does not have a specific server in Armenia for Armenians to use. So how can data sovereignty be guaranteed or ensured a little bit, just from the perspective of not just availability, but the fact that, you know, we want control over it, you know, so...
Look, first of all, you are totally right talking about raising the question of data sovereignty. In other words, it is called data nativity, and when you keep the data, when you keep your own data on your own servers. It is a little bit difficult to say where is the closest Amazon data center to Armenia, because it is really not possible to measure the distance. The more distant data center can be closer in terms of network connectivity. So the closest Amazon data center is in Germany, particularly nearby the Frankfurt. They have some facilities, and in terms of data connectivity, Armenian fiber optic channels are going through Georgia to Sofia, Bulgaria, and from Sofia, Bulgaria to Frankfurt Exchange. So the closest one will be the German one. But we have to understand that European Union laws that require data sovereignty, this law is the biggest problem for tech companies, is the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, adopted in EU in 2016 and enforced in 2018. Starting that period of time, all the big tech companies have started to provide data sovereignty service for European customers. They have started building data centers in Europe, and you may use Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or even G-Workspace. You may maintain your data on the territory of European Union. So understanding, and right now I am going into assumptions, not knowledge, understanding that Armenian government have chosen a path of becoming part of Europe, or at least they are voicing that approach. They are trying to deepen a relationship with Europe. Most probably they will follow the way of data sovereignty approach, saying that if our data is being kept in Europe, then we are fine with this. But currently, there are no signs that Amazon is trying to build or trying to rent a data center facilities here in Armenia, and I do not expect such a step in a predictable future.
I wanted to draw your attention to another part of the statement about protection. Basically, Amazon provides protection only for money. What I'm trying to say, when you are a client on Amazon, when you launch your server there, your infrastructure, you are usually in charge of protecting it. And if you want, say, CloudFront or something, some extra services for Amazon to do extra analysis and protection, that costs more and more money. So either some of these statement is not quite true, or somebody misunderstood, or some non-technical people wrote to this, or they didn't calculate how much the costs are going to add up when you start to rely on Amazon for security. So again, when they bring the point about security, I look at it and I try to understand, is this actually security, or again, we are drifting into some strange territories? I do agree that there is Amazon on-premise. This issue can be solved, but what cannot be solved, whether Armenia has enough qualified engineers to provide enough security on Amazon equipment, etc., because most of the engineers working for government for very low wages, honestly, are dealing with local on-premise services, vSphere installations, VMware, some totally other technology. And now all those people will have to be requalified to learn Amazon and try to do it. They are going to make a huge number of mistakes, misconfigurations, and Amazon has been in a lot of scandals relating to data leaks, S3s, buckets opened up for the whole world, etc., even with Zoom, the very technology we're using now. So when I see the security points, I start to disagree, because I can see a lot of disasters waiting to happen, but I would really want to also have the feedback from you guys on this, because I don't see security here.
Look, guys, I would like to continue a topic that Artur have voiced. You can be really insecure with Amazon, like with any other computer system, or with any other computer network. It is all up to your skills or someone's skills. You can be insecure on Amazon. Amazon does not provide security by default. It is not possible in technical terms. You have to be capable to create those security systems. You have to be capable to create those security approaches and security mechanisms to provide secure services. So if you do not know what security is, Amazon will not solve the issues. Amazon is just a tool that can be configured improperly. And again, seconding Artur's command, you can do a lot of wrong stuff on Amazon, on any other cloud provider.
Yeah. Well, as soon as a cloud-first approach is adopted, there are a couple of significant concerns that arise alongside data sovereignty. One is that Armenia's internet fiber link that goes through Georgia has proven very fragile over time and doesn't have enough resilience or redundancy. Furthermore, the company that owns that fiber is now majority or fully owned by Azerbaijan. These are huge risks to Armenia's mission-critical services. Second, once the data leaves the country, even if it's housed in friendly EU, well, there's a loss of control over it, and that brings foreign control or pressure on Armenia. We have seen, for example, how Georgia's so-called foreign agent bill froze Georgia's process for EU membership and other US partnership initiatives. So you can see that as soon as Armenia displays any independent thinking or activity that the West doesn't like, the data will be held hostage against Armenia. So this concerns me.
And you're totally right, Aspet. But look, right now I can be accused of politicizing this issue. It is always easier to try to rely on someone from outside than to develop your own capacity. I mean, it makes people work, and they do not like to work. They do not like to develop something their own. They try to find someone to outsource all the possible stuff. Right now, we do see how we try to outsource our security, not in terms of cyber security, but in terms of physical security, in terms of military security. We are trying to outsource our international policy. We are trying to outsource everything. We would like to see a foreign entity to come and solve the issues for us and try to lie to the society by saying, okay, we are buying Amazon, that is secure by design. It is not. And this imitation of work can be seen everywhere in every aspect of our life. I mean, why do you expect that something shall be better in cybersecurity field if we fail on all the others? I mean, this question is just a part of a general approach. And your concerns, my concerns, Artur's concerns, Hovik's concerns are all quite legitimate. We are asking those questions to the universe and wondering why the universe is not answering us back.
Artur, we talked about this data protection bill for Armenian citizens. Is there anything about shipping that data outside of Armenia's borders to begin with, just so that we have a pretense that there's some law that's protecting us? All this stuff is truly shocking to me. That I'm like, and I'm someone who has been following it, but it seems like we're moving light speed in the wrong direction.
I have some internal discussions I've had in the past, and I don't want to talk too much about data sovereignty because this can be solved. Like I already mentioned, there is Amazon on-premise, and I don't think Armenian security services are very eager of letting their data go. So I don't really see that as the main problem, but rather the problem that many people who are not skilled in Amazon are going to have to rely on this because government signed some law, and I don't feel that Armenia is prepared to have this big shift. So this is actually more pressing issue for me because if they were able to provide proper security, they would have already done that.
I want to circle back to a point I may have missed a little earlier when we discussed about the time during and after the 44-day war, when Azeri hackers got into the Armenian government networks and also hacked into the public cameras. Was there any follow-through on that issue? Was anything fixed? Were there reports published about findings, mitigations, etc.?
We don't know if there was follow-through. That's one of the problems because the government, even if they follow through, they never would confess it or talk about it. So we don't know if anybody was ever punished, and nobody was notified for sure.
I would like to bring to your attention the stories that I have told you about the situation during the war. And currently I can say that no investigation and no results of investigations regarding hacks during the war were published. I mean, nothing was published regarding this stuff. No follow-up.
Was there ever any kind of an independent commission set up to investigate and audit this process? The Azerbaijani hack-in?
By the way, the episode that Ruben is talking about is episode 46. We had a discussion about the security incidents during the war. So I would encourage all of our listeners who are interested to go to that podcast episode. But please go ahead, Ruben.
So when we talk about this stuff, Artur have mentioned the hack into Parking City Center, or how is it called?
Parking City Service or whatever, yeah.
Or whatever. So the entity responsible for the surveillance cameras for parking. No one was kept accountable, at least no result of investigation was published regarding this. This government is brilliant in hiding the stuff under the carpet. And again, no public watchdogs are addressing those issues.
Ruben, essentially, what is the current state of Armenia's national cybersecurity posture? Is it any better than it was in 2020?
Look, I cannot properly address your question, or I cannot properly answer your question because I have not made any research on this or have any quantitative data regarding this, because we know about the hacks only when those hacks are going public, and most common publicity to those attacks is being done by Azeris, not by our government. So we do see that someone was broken into by reports of Azeri hackers, and it is my permanent question, constant question, if we know that much, how much of the cases are being kept secret? So I cannot answer your question properly, Aspet. Sorry for that, because I will go into assumptions or into irresponsible statements. I do not want to say this stuff for the record. I have my estimates but I would not like to share them publicly.
Understood. All right, let's leave this conversation here today. Thank you, Arthur and Ruben, for joining us for this very interesting talk on cybersecurity, privacy, and other issues Armenia is facing today.
The pleasure is mine, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Arthur.
All right, that's our show today. This episode was recorded on July 13, 2024. We've been talking with Artur Babian, who is a malware researcher, digital security consultant, and co-founder of CyberHub. He is also the director of the Media Diversity Institute. And Ruben Muradian, a Yerevan-based cybersecurity analyst. He's an independent researcher and a frequent speaker on cybersecurity topics on ArmSec and Barcamp. Please remember to support us. Go to our donate page, podcasts.groong.org/donate, and become a sustaining member of Groong and give monthly. Thank you in advance. I'm Asbet Bedrosian.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
Please follow us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.